Good afternoon. Welcome to Cornet New England Crave event. As this pandemic event started taking shape, your executive committee made the forward-thinking decision to continue our strong educational mission and created CRAVE, Cornet New England Real Advantage Virtual Education Series, supporting our membership's desire for continued learning. CRAVE series is a virtual roundtable discussing important, timely, and relevant topics in corporate real estate. This is brought to you by Real Advantage and Education Committees and is open to all Cornet members. Topics that may be explored: remote working, morale management, policies providing a safe work environment, supply chain logistics, changes to workplaces that are not in lockdown, construction and legal implications, and ergonomics technology for a home office setup are some of the topics under consideration. These sessions are being conducted in lieu of and similar to the Real Advantage workshops and education events. Because of the criticality of the information being exchanged, the corporate partners and founding circle members who fund Real Advantage have agreed to make these sessions open to all members. Once the COVID-19 crisis has passed and business as usual begins, we will return to stated levels of participation for corporate partners and founding circle members. Cornet New England has a full slate of upcoming virtual events. Please check out our website and our Monday morning chapter newsletter to register. Engage with us on social media and help share the Cornet New England story through Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. We'd like to thank you to our sponsors for their generous support of the chapter. Without their support, we would not be able to provide our members with valuable content such as today's presentation. Thank you to our corporate partners, our platinum sponsors, and our gold sponsors. Before we dive into today's presentation, please note that you can submit questions to our speakers through the Q&A box in Zoom. We will address questions at the end of the presentation. I would like to hand this over to Steve White.
Happy Friday, everybody. For anyone who doesn't know what day it is, my name is Steve White. I'm the president of PES Associates. We're an environmental engineering firm located here in Hingham, Massachusetts. I've had the pleasure to work with Iron Mountain during Hurricane Maria, which was one of the worst natural disasters in history, actually. I got to see firsthand how the panelists and their teams responded to what seemed to be an impossible situation. The facilities taking on incredible damage, almost inaccessible land to land or even across the island, and almost no communication. And of course, the recent pandemic has presented its own wonderful challenges for all of us. Our panelists will share their knowledge, their perspective, and the emergency preparedness and response to reality. And we'll walk you through some real life scenarios and tap into their experience. But more importantly, let me introduce you to our panel. Dan Aninos is the Vice President of Global Facility Management and EM Project Delivery at Iron Mountain. For those who don't know, Iron Mountain is a global business dedicated to storing, protecting, and managing information and assets, most of it critical. At Iron Mountain, Dan is responsible for global facility management and for capital project delivery, as well as disaster planning and recovery for close to 80% of Iron Mountain's 90 million square feet globally. Prior to joining Iron Mountain, Dan was the Chief of Staff for the Army Corps of Engineers, where he was responsible for programs and project management of the United States Civil Works and defense installation infrastructure. Dan was also a recipient of 2 Bronze Stars for his service in Iraq. Kara Wardell. This is on a broad spectrum of risk management issues, including contractual language, M&A due diligence, risk mitigation, business development, risk analysis, and claims management. Kara serves as a director of the Massachusetts RIM chapter, which is a society committed to advancing risk management capabilities and organizational success. I forgot to do, I could do the slides. Sorry about that. I'm driving the bus at the same time, guys, sorry. Here we go. Matt Jerome is Vice President of Document Recovery Sales at BMS CAT. BMS CAT provides global disaster recovery services and has responded to some of the world's most devastating disasters. Matt's been on the ground for significant weather events, including Hurricanes Matthew, Harvey, Florence, assisting in clients in the recovery of vital records, paper documents, and other media damaged by disasters. His hands-on, real-life experience provides vital expertise needed to mitigate loss and ensure that valuable records and documents are handled with care, and most importantly, proper protocols are followed. And finally, Carrie Huggins. Carrie spent time working, she's the Vice President of Sales and Business Development at BMS CAT. She spent time working on logistics and risk for the Department of Defense in Washington, D.C. before joining BMS CAT in 2006. At BMS CAT, Carrie and her team focused on developing customer-centric relationships and organizing internal processes, and her team has twice been awarded Marriott Global Engineering Team's Top Vendor of the Year award. Carrie was the only female graduate to receive a degree from Marriott's Advanced Engineering Program in 2016. So I welcome the panelists, and again, thank you for your time. For this event, we thought we'd walk you through the life cycle of a disaster from the perspective of risk management, operations, and the service partner. Each of the panelists will give us their perspective on their roles during pre-event, the event itself, and post-event. But first, let's start with Dan to kick it off. Dan, what are the key attributes when an organization is faced with a disaster?
Yeah, go ahead, go to that slide, Steve. Yes, thanks, Steve. And so October 29th, 2012, Superstorm Sandy rolled itself up from Florida all the way up to New York. It impacted over 650,000 homes. 8 million residents lost power. Storm surge in the New York, New Jersey area was approximately 8 to 12 feet, which flooded every single tunnel leading into New York, Manhattan, from New Jersey. The stock exchange actually closed first time in 27 years. And the recovery effort in itself took billions of dollars to recover. And then we received a phone call from the White House informing us they want the Staten Island ferries operational within 48 hours after the storm came through New York, New Jersey. So you look at that particular problem set and you think to yourself, where do you begin? Where do you start? And how do you get after this problem set to really reopen the infrastructure in itself? And thinking back on it, I relied on these few attributes and characteristics of any recovery effort to kind of guide us through and get us through that particular event and the numerous other events that I've been part of throughout my career. Now, thinking back on it, I think the White House had it about right. Although at the time it didn't, we're scratching our heads, it didn't seem, what's the urgency of the 48 hours? But the sooner you can open up the country and open up the roads and open up the infrastructure, there's a sense of things that are happening and things can get back to normal. And if you think about it, it really applies to what's going on today, where we closed the infrastructure for right reasons. Now we're trying to figure out how to open it up and bring the economy back to its feet. So it all kind of blends together, and then sorting it out through these characteristics is very critical in thinking through any sort of problem set. And the bottom one that I have on the slide here on compassion, it's not on the bottom of the slide, but it is the foundation in my mind on whenever you go through any sort of disaster and respond. There's a lot of challenges going on with individuals, with families, with loved ones. And in your recovery effort, you always have to keep in mind, what more can you do? What more should you do to bring everybody back to a sense of normalcy? And that compassion really should drive whatever you do to work around the clock and to create the right culture within your own particular business lines to get you back on your feet. And by keeping compassion there as a foundation, everything above that drives it. And then you'll hear a lot of that from our teammates and this panel members on what they did and how they did react in each particular phase of a disaster response operation. Steve, back over to you.
Thanks, Dan. So we're at the pre-event stage. So Kara, how does risk management handle, what is their role in the pre-event planning stage? Oh, you're on mute, Kara.
Thank you. Sorry, I did that at every practice, so of course I would do it at the today. So thanks, Dave. So nobody ever knows the intricacies of a loss. Nobody realized before Superstorm Sandy hit what that impact would look like. Same with Iron Mountain. We didn't know exactly what was going to happen in Puerto Rico when the Hurricane Maria hit, but there are, because there's always those nuances. There's always those unexpected obstacles. You're on an island. You have difficulty getting supplies in. You have employees that are greatly impacted. You have the workforce is just not the same because you can't draw from other states as easily as you could if it occurred on mainland. You had the government, taking on your supplies that you were trying to get into the country. So you can't necessarily know how the course of every loss is going to happen, but you can definitely prepare for it. You can prepare for a framework for a loss that's flexible enough to allow for those claim differentials, but rigid enough that expectations are clear. And how do you do that? It's really important. It's all about relationships and planning up front. And so the key relationships are your insurers, your vendors, and your internal stakeholders. Know who your insurers are, know your underwriter, know the intent of what your coverage is, know your vendors. Who are the people that can come if you have a roof that's missing? Who can come if you have a tree in the side of your building? Kind of anticipate that and make sure you have folks that are lined up. And your internal stakeholders, make sure that you prepare and talk to them and get their insight into what's important to them, because what's important to me might not be as important to our customer service lead. Then the next thing I recommend is making sure you understand your coverage and your customer contracts. So really reading your policy, or if you're not the risk manager, asking your risk manager or whoever's in charge of your insurance or your broker, what's the expectation of my insurance in the event of a loss? What's it designed to do? Do I have money to help me expedite my return to normalcy? Knowing that will help you plan out the design loss process as well, and also probably make you make some changes to how you insure your program. Another key thing, especially for Iron Mountain, was to understand our customers, but for others, it might be the end users of your product. Understanding that supply chain. For us, understanding what our customer SLAs are really helps drive the process for Iron Mountain. And that process is really important to have kind of upfront. Design that loss process. What are the common elements that any loss would have? What are the expectations in any loss? So for example, with Iron Mountain, chain of custody of our customer goods is our utmost responsibility. And making sure that your vendor partners understand that when they come in, they just can't come in and start moving customer boxes without having somebody from Iron Mountain there. And we have a whole process established for that. You obviously want to mitigate your loss right away, but there's a process in place, and there's account instructions that when there's an event, somebody can look at that and understand that. So really knowing what the key elements are, and those won't change loss to loss. The next thing I recommend, and this is, I kind of learned it the hard way, was prior to Hurricane Maria, is that relationship with your carrier, and knowing your underwriter, but also knowing your head of claims ahead of time. So you're not meeting them the first time when there's a loss, and really getting with them in agreement with them. What do we have authority to do in that first phase of loss? Mitigation, what's that going to look like? Listen, Iron Mountain needs to go in there. We can't wait for an adjuster to show up. We can't wait, for somebody to come help us. We might bring our employees in over the weekend and move tapes out of our building. And maybe we start the drying process, wiping them down. We want to make sure that they understand that those costs are things that we're going to want and expect from them. And we want to have that leverage to do things in the first 24 to 48 hours on a claim that really won't get questioned. That before we can actually have a meeting with the adjuster, that we can take these steps and not have to worry about that spend going forward. Also, too, when you meet with your vendors, you want to make sure they understand what authority they have and who gives them that authority. So they would probably be dealing with the local folks on the ground, but in reality, they also have to understand that the folks on the ground are not the ones that actually, pay the deductible or pay the claim. And so as such, we need to make sure that the vendors understand the chain of authority and who they need to go to. You don't want to micromanage it from risk management by all means, but you want to understand if there's pivotal events, if they have to make pivotal decisions, they do need to make sure that everybody's kept in the loop. And, service level expectations, right? Making it, setting our expectations for our vendors up front. How are we expecting them to react during the event? Who can they bring in as resources? With Iron Mountain, they have to have certain background checks. That was difficult in Puerto Rico to get the background checks completed and actually find a work pool that could actually support the number of people that we needed when everybody on the island was looking for temps as well. What do they have to report back to us on? What are the key things that they can't make the decisions on their own? What are the metrics? How are we going to track the progress of it? And it's important too that the carrier be involved, because the carriers in large losses, they may bring in somebody that oversees the claim and is almost kind of counting, like how many boxes are they moving today? How many things are being dried, et cetera, et cetera. And so you want to understand what the carrier's expectations are with metrics and make sure that they agree, the vendors agree to those. And then a decision matrix, like I said, just to make sure everybody knows who makes what decisions. So they may have a supervisor on the ground that says, listen, we want you to do it this way. And that might be different than the process that we establish up front. So who does the vendor have to come to make sure that change is okay? And again, ensuring that the carrier is involved from the start, making sure that they might have special billing requirements. They might want to be billed monthly, quarterly. At the end, they might have certain approval processes for changes in scope. And so you can do a lot of pre-work to help you prepare to handle a situation that will have many unknowns. And I'll turn over to Dan to talk about operations.
Thanks, Kara. I think the key on the operations on the pre-planning side is really understanding your core business and what you sell to your customers and what keeps you in business. And then you have to understand what's important to your customer that they are storing or that have in your facilities. And for us, for example, in Iron Mountain, it's all about protecting our customer's product and preserving our customer product. So you kind of take a look at that and say, okay, given that, if there's a natural disaster, whatever it may be, earthquake, tornado, hurricane, pandemic, whatever it is, you have to understand your buildings. You have to have good knowledge of your buildings and their vulnerabilities. Is the roof vulnerable? Is the power vulnerable? How resilient is your power? Are you in a flood zone, 50-year flood zone, 100-year flood zone? what's the electrical power situation in that area? Is it vulnerable or is it not vulnerable? So you kind of take a look of all those things and you pre-plan and try to do the best that you can up front to ensure that those facilities are ready to adapt to any situation that may come out there the best that you can, recognizing you can't plan for everything, and equally, you cannot resource everything, but you try to do the best you can to mitigate that in order to stay in business, in order to support your customers quickly and safely after that particular event. And one of the keys around that is not only preparing your facilities, but it's also lining up your vendors up front to ensure that they're on standby to support you after it's safe enough on the event to mobilize. Do you have your roofing vendors on standby? Do you have your electricians on standby? Where are your generators? Do you have several of them you can move around in a particular crisis? So if you take all those into account, you can minimize business discontinuity, get you up and running, and support your customers on the back end as fast as possible. And more importantly, preserve and protect your customer's product. And that's what we as Iron Mountain sell, and that's important. And when we're passionate about that in preparing our facilities to go through any sort of natural disaster or person-induced disaster. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt and BMS Cat to talk about the service side of planning.
Great, thank you, Dan. So yeah, from a service partner perspective, we want to really make sure that we are indeed a partner and we understand our client's business very clearly. In the case of working with Iron Mountain, we understand that chain of custody and taking excellent care of their customer assets are the core of their business. So we really want to understand what our clients do so that we're able to help serve them, keep any type of business continuity plan going in place there. But maybe there's another type of customer as well. What are their hours of operation? Is there foot traffic? What kind of facility is it? What's in that facility? Are there equipment, supplies, hazardous materials? What kind of rooms? Is it a hotel? Is it a warehouse? Is it some sort of a power plant? So understanding the client's business so that we can service them in a way that allows them to keep operating if possible really makes a big difference for us. We want to make sure we have pre-meetings so that we are really in tune with everything that they do. Understanding the customer's disaster plan is a big deal for us. What are the goals and the priorities for this client? Are the decision makers at the local level, or are they at the corporate level? Kara had alluded to that a little bit earlier, that a lot of times the local folks are able to make decisions, but we have to keep in mind that corporate may be paying deductibles. And so we have to understand how their structure works so that when decisions are made, we're going through the right chains. And if the business is able to stay open, are we able to work around them? We want to make sure that for the pre-event, we have our employees trained. In this case here, if we were working with an Iron Mountain, for example, we'd want to make sure that everybody is indeed trained on chain of custody processes, compliance, confidentiality. We do HIPAA training with employees so they understand if they're working with sensitive materials, they need to handle them sensitively. Safety training with OSHA. Then we go into certification maintenance. Make sure that everything is up to date with our certification. Mold remediation specialists, building licenses, HIPAA training again. And then last is the resource planning. When there is some sort of an event that happens, being a national company, we're able to bring in resources from other parts of the nation, whether it be labor or supplies, and we want to plan that out, make sure that we have the appropriate project directors in place to help out our customers. We want to make sure that we place our equipment in places where it's close to whatever event. Say, for example, if it's a hurricane, we have materials that are close, but they're not in harm's way, so that once that storm may pass, we're able to bring the equipment in to help out with whatever projects might be there. So, from a service partner standpoint, on the pre-event planning, it really is to get to know our customer's business real well, make sure we have all of our paperwork and certifications buttoned up before something bad happens and we're not scrambling at the last minute, and we do understand what they do. So with that, I'll pass it on back to Stephen.
Yeah, Matt, quick question, if you don't mind. And this actually goes to all of you, because it sounds to me that relationships are like paramount in this whole process. Because given what we've seen over the past couple of months, everybody's fighting for the same resources, right? So if everyone's looking for not generators and there's a huge shortage of generators, you have to have really solid relationships with your vendors and your partners in order to, pull that favor, because otherwise, they're going to go to the highest bidder, I assume, You agree?
Well, with us, we make sure that we're meeting not just on the day of the event or ahead of time. We do take a very long view and a long approach where we understand and we talk about buildings, and as Dan alluded to, what may be each building's characteristics. And so, we do have a long range of that relationship, but also long range in planning. If we see some sort of event happening, we make sure we have enough equipment in the area so it's not chaos at the last minute.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we've talked about pre-event planning. So let's talk about the big event when we are faced with a natural disaster, and from a risk management perspective, Kara.
Sure. So thanks. So the most important thing to Iron Mountain, and I'm sure to all of your organizations, is ensuring that your employees are safe and that their families are safe and that they're taken care of to the best of your company's ability during the event. In Puerto Rico, we tried to get as many supplies as we could to our employees. We helped somebody who was on dialysis get to find the right treatment for him, doing whatever we can, because your employees oftentimes, are impacted by it, right? And so making sure your employees are safe is utmost of importance when an event occurs. And then from the risk management side, your insurance brain kind of kicks in, and what do you have to do? Obviously, you want to communicate with your insurer. You want to let them know what's going on, let them know what you've done over the past 24, 48 hours, however long it has been since the event had happened and the time has elapsed. And then what you want to do is you want to start establishing a cadence with the insurer. How often do they want to have updates? What are the key things they're going to want to know about? Because even though you've established that relationship, you're going to probably have an adjuster that you don't know or haven't really worked with before. So you want them to get comfortable with you. You probably want to make sure that the person that you do know at the carrier is on that initial call so that everybody kind of has a good sense about it. What you also want to do is you want to memorialize what they want and need in writing. So just a quick email back, hey, it was great speaking with you. These are the things that I took away from our conversation. Just let me know if I've missed anything. Then what you want to do, once you understand what the insurer needs, because they obviously are going to be key to reimbursing you for your expenses related to the loss, is you want to hold a meeting with your stakeholders. So you want to make sure that you understand who your internal stakeholders are for that particular loss, who your project manager is at your vendors, and then the carriers. And again, get a cadence. How often do we want to meet? So in Puerto Rico, we literally met every single day, even if it was 30 minutes for the first 3 weeks. And then it was probably twice. We ended up getting down to twice a week and then eventually once a week, but that was a year into the project. I always tried to put together an agenda. And I took notes and I kept them as rolling notes. So each time I'd go back and recap what we talked about last time and talk about what we needed to make decisions on. I'd survey everybody to say, is there anything that we want to make sure we want to cover off before we get off this call? And then again, at the end, make sure that everybody had an opportunity to ask at anything that we talked about. If we had a scope change, if we had to, make decisions on things, those were highlighted, and maybe separate emails were done, or I would chase people, hey, you had to, check with this certain customer care about this certain customer, and make sure that we did that. But it's really important to keep those lines of communication open very early on. And I think probably the most important thing is scope agreement. With a smaller loss, it's important, but when you have a larger loss, and you want to make sure early on that you have agreement from everybody. You know who the decision makers are and at the carrier, and you have their agreement up front to avoid any issues when you get to resolution. I can't tell you how much easier it is to manage, you know, a tens of millions of dollars claim at the end. A lot of people are like, oh, it's going to be really hard to finalize that. And I'm like, no, because we actually took steps as we went along, and any change in scope, we immediately communicated it, we documented it, and we got approval. And the adjusters like that too. Not everyone's used to working in that methodology, but they usually come around to it when you explain to them what the benefit is of them to do the work as you go along instead of at the end. With your vendors, you know, make sure you remind them of like the decision matrix, and make sure you remind them of our special protocols that we have in place. And then the other thing that's important is, again, you don't want to micromanage the process, because then you don't want to stymie work getting done. You just want to make sure that they, you know, that they understand who the local contacts are, that the local contacts have the right amount of authority to make decisions on a regular basis, and that everything is kind of rolled up, and that the entire team in these regular meetings are updated with that. And then what's also important is your customer care. Like for us, it's customers. Yours might be your end users. It might be your hotel guests, whatever it is. Really ensure that your customers or your end users are aware of what's going on, right? So that customer communication is important. And so we internally have, you know, a communications department that we work with. And you obviously want to work with your legal department if it could have any you know, impact on contractual requirements, things like that. But making sure that your customers are taken care of. But as a risk manager, you want to be involved in that communication, because you also want to be careful about what's being released to your customers, that it won't, like for example, if with a hurricane, it's a force majeure event, right? So you want to make sure that it's identified as a force majeure event up front, that we're clear and honest about what happened, what the impact to their items are, but that you start laying the path to set the right expectations to your customers. We also develop talk tracks and things of that nature, and we are always on that steering committee to make sure that if there's any you know, anything that could negatively impact the outcome of the insurance claim, and it doesn't always necessarily need to be property, because sometimes when an event happens, you could impact other policies like a warehouse legal or your general liability or anything of that nature. So having you look at it and kind of thinking of it holistically and how it could impact your insurances are really important. Dan, I'll turn it over to you to talk about what happens operationally when an event occurs. And Dan, you're on mute. You pulled the camera.
Okay, I'm good. I'll pull the camera. So as real estate professionals, you're going to be viewed as a subject matter expert to recover that building, that loss, and put the right measures in place to get the business back to business. And you're going to be pulled in multiple directions. The business will always want you to do this, and that, and do more to get them quickly back operational. Then you're going to have the cost side of things that you do have to manage, and you do have to be mindful, because you don't have a blank checkbook to fully to spend all the money that you need to get to put in the measures that need to get put in. And then the other part you're going to be struggling with and have to work with, as was Kara's point, is the insurer, because certain things are going to be covered, certain things are not going to be covered. If they're not going to be covered, you got to figure out how that's going to get paid. If they are going to be covered, you have to make sure it's within the scope of the policy. So you're going to have to be able to balance and manage all three of those pieces. So my advice has always been, and I've always subscribed to, is do what you need to do to triage the situation, to stabilize the situation, and nobody will generally question what you did, how much money you spent to just triage a situation to make it worse. And then from there, you're going to get tugged. The business will want you to do this, that there's a resource behind that. And what does the insurance, keeping the insurance informed on what you're doing and the next steps after you triage. So there's the piece that really requires a lot of effort and a lot of coordination when you're actually into that operation, because you always want to bring, and it's ideally, to Kara's point, is you bring the insurance to view the actual damage. I give you an example. When we had a situation in South Korea, our insurance company, the adjuster didn't quite understand the scope of magnitude, no matter how much pictures we sent over. And then we were executing triage type safety measures to stabilize that collapse that we had, which was a wreck collapse. They really didn't understand the full scope and breadth, and they were questioning pretty much everything that we were spending. Brought them over, and then he understood, wow, this thing is much bigger than I thought. And then from there, we were able to work together side by side to get things done, and then generally things flow through once you get past the triage space. So it's very critical to do that. And then equally, you do have to manage your vendors that will come in, and you have to dictate and direct the scope as real estate professionals. They provide advice, you provide the authority, and you provide the scope because you are the expert. You know the building, you know the business needs, and you know what it's going to take to get you back operational. And then you keep the insurer informed on what you're doing, and you're going to have to adjust the scope here and here. You're going to have to justify a scope here and here. You're going to have to justify a change order here and there. That's okay. That's just part of the day-to-day details that you have to work through during the operation. And whatever plan you had in place, probably you execute 50% of that plan, and the other 50% of the plan you're going to probably have to make up because the situation that you're encountering is not in the plan. But that's just natural the way these things go, because situations change, and each plan and each disaster is much different. So as real estate professionals, triage the building in order not to make things worse, and then you work the details with the insurer, with your vendors, and with your personal knowledge to get the building back to where it needs to be and get the business back to where it needs to be. So they're the key things as you're going through a particular scenario during the actual execution. And then, oh, by the way, in case you were wondering, we were able to get those ferries operational within 48 hours as part of this phase. Okay, back over to Matt.
All right, thanks, Dan. Yeah, and so during the event, as you had stated, yeah, you can really plan out a lot of things, but as you say, it changes, and you have to be fluid in your thinking and the suggestions you make, and the experts that you have in there. And as Dan had said, I'll ride on those coattails with stopping the loss and triaging. We want to do what we can to stabilize the building as the event may be happening or is concluding. Is there still water coming into a facility, for example? Is there a way to stop that water with maybe some sort of redirection? Putting on some sort of a temporary fix, like shrink wrapping a roof, or putting out some sort of a tarping system or some sort of stabilization. So stopping the loss from being worse, triage, and then mitigating. An example I'll give here is if we're doing a document facility and there are several documents that are wet, a way that we can cease any further damage would be to start freezing some documents. So those documents won't get any worse once they're in a frozen state, and that will kind of help the situation. So down the road, we don't have anything that turns into mold or disintegration of documents. But during the event, we have that piece of it, the stopping the loss, the triage, mitigation, and then we would come to an agreement with a customer on what the statement of work is going to look like. Is it a reconstruction situation? Is it a cleanup situation? And we want to make sure, as Kara and Dan have both said, we have a very clear understanding of what we're going to do for the customer. We put it into writing, into a statement of work, make sure that we have the proper buy-off from the customer at the right levels, and then we can begin work on that. And we do our daily check-ins to make sure that work is proceeding the way in which they want. As we go through, the meetings may become less and less frequent, and we'll just make sure that we're meeting all of the goals that were set up for us. And then finally, the last bullet that I have on here is the documentation and the invoicing. We want to make sure that we present a real clear invoice package that has all the proper backup. Make sure that we do it all right on the first time around, and we have a meeting with the customer and they understand what it is that they're being presented with. So when they present it to who they need to, we don't have to go back a second time to do anything. And then finally, we would have what's called a work complete, where all the work would be reviewed, and if everything is satisfactory, we do the final work complete form. So, Steve, I'll pass it back to you, sir.
Thanks, Matt. So you did your pre-planning, you have your plan, and you had your event. Now what really happened, I guess, comes to the post-event, where we kind of look back and see how everything worked out. So from a risk management perspective, what do you do in the post-event?
Right. So in the post-event, I consider that when we adjudicate with the carrier, a lot of times carriers are not pay on behalf of, but it's a reimbursement policy. So all those actions that you take, all those steps that you take throughout the claim to keep them engaged and involved and approving any scope and scope changes is really important, because if you get to the end of the claim and you did stuff and they didn't agree with it, or they didn't agree with the pricing that Matt gave you or the other vendors have given us, then there's a lot of negotiation and probably a lot of unhappy people, because people have to take haircuts on what they charge and what they thought their revenue was going to be coming in. And so adjudication should be much easier if you get scope and rates and costs all set up front. Also too, on larger losses, a lot of us use a claim preparer, somebody that helps us track all of our costs for both business interruption, extra expense, and property damage. Just make sure that they're kept in the loop. They don't need to be on every call because I charge by the hour, but just to make sure that they're understanding all of the agreements to scope and exposures as well. And then it's really important, what Iron Mountain does really well is do an internal post-loss debrief. And we hold those meetings so that we say, you know, what did we do well? What would we change in the future? And, you know, we bring in business continuity planning and, you know, are there, the BCP team, are there things that we would change of how we should prepare for this in the future? You know, making sure that we look at our processes and kind of go full circle and go back with the vendors and our insurers. So, you know, what are the lessons learned? I think this is, you know, most important is that the loss was not just an event, but use it as a way to reduce your future risk. You should always learn from your losses, and you know, what can you do to avoid the loss from happening again? Or how do you mitigate it? How can you prepare for a loss that could occur in a country that doesn't have access to a BMS CAT or another company? We had some floods in India a few years back, and you know, we have an obligation to make sure that our customers' material are stabilized. We don't necessarily always have a contractual obligation to remediate them or have exposure for those documents, but we as a warehouseman cannot let those documents deteriorate. So Matt mentioned freeze drying. Well, freeze drying was not available in India. And so what we did was we brought in our employees, we hired on some temps, and we set a drying, which in India worked very well, a drying process. And it wasn't in the raining season, thankfully. And it was a flood, but it was something different. And so they were able to set up a drying process, and actually the materials came out fantastic. And so we talked about then, how do we set that up if we don't have a vendor that can come in and do it for us? So, and you want to meet with your stakeholders as well. You want to make sure that you have, you know, your adjuster, your head director of claims, and say, what did we learn? What did we do well from this? What were the points of frustration? How did we see that there was waste, you know, or cost or exorbitance or things like that to help the insurers. Post Hurricane Maria, there were a lot of recommendations about how to utilize vendors that we gave to our insurers, and they actually took it well. And again, you want to just loop back to that pre-planning process. You want to say, what are the lessons learned, and how do those lessons impact? It's all good and well and good you learn your lessons, but if you don't implement change because of it, it's all for naught. So just go back and meet with your insurers and say, hey, this didn't go as well, or we kind of argued about this at the end. What could we have done differently during the loss to make sure that we were aligned at the end? And same with your vendors. Hey, we had some problems with the process of decanting boxes. Let's talk about that, because if it has to happen in the future, we want to make sure that we have the best way to do it. And you came up with some obstacles because the in-rack sprinklers were there, and how do you manage around that? So just really making sure that you not only understand the lessons learned, but you use those to mitigate any future risks. And I'll turn it to Dan.
Okay, thanks, Karen. From the real estate professional side, I think the key point in this particular phase is really to understand how that facility performed during whatever natural disaster or person-induced disaster came through that area. And then you have to assess how it performed and what you had to do on the back end in the previous phase to stabilize it and get it back operational. And then can you take those lessons on how it performed or how well it did not perform, and then apply that to other buildings that are equally vulnerable, have similar characteristics, and try to invest during after the event in these other buildings to ensure that if an event like similar comes through again, we'll be better prepared, and that facility better prepared to take on whatever it took on during this particular event. Just as an example, what we've learned is over multiple years is we started wiring our facilities in vulnerable areas so they can accept a certain size generator to power that building up to stay in business once an event has passed and we can safely get the generator in place. We did purchase several generators that we have on standby on trailers located in multiple states where we can easily mobilize them should we need it. We also purchased what we call is a recovery disaster trailer that we have in a location where we keep it stocked with a couple generators, tarps, what have you, to enable some roofing material, to enable to deploy that quickly in a certain location to stabilize the situation until we can get a permanent fix. So it's those types of planning on the post end you can put in place and be prepared for the next one. But if you don't put those certain things in place, then you're really going to relearn what you did. And it's never a good thing to relearn and essentially have to live through the same type of situation because you didn't prepare those other buildings, where you didn't pre-wire those buildings, where you didn't have enough generators to move about in order to be flexible and support the next one, which the next one will naturally does come. So that's key in my mind. As real estate professional, we have to think about the next one, think about what we learned on this one, and can we put a certain amount of investment in these other types of buildings in order to mitigate another potential storm or disaster coming through the area. So then the final one is really they're going to look at you as a real estate professional on what you did, how you did it, how much you spent, who did you coordinate with, and then were you managing your external vendors, and then you keep your insurance adjuster informed. You have to have all those paperwork and documents and decisions readily available to Kara's point, because ultimately the settlement will happen after the disaster, And if you have all those documents and all those decision points, why you made that decision well documented, it's easy to go back and reconstruct what happened, because people, certain individuals may exit the company when this final audit is happening, or you may have forgotten something. But if you have a good folder at the end of this and during it to keep track of all this, it'll make the back end process a lot easier when we're trying to close out the loan, and I'm sorry, not the loan, the actual insurance event. And if you have all those in place and the decisions and keeping everybody informed, the final adjudication for closing out the insurance event will go much easier. We're kind of learning some of these challenges now in that South Korea one, where we initially didn't have the insurance adjuster on site and understanding the full what happened, and we're kind of reconstructing some of that. So don't relearn that lesson on future events as real estate professionals. Just keep your files in place and then learn from this and make appropriate investments in your real estate portfolio, getting ready for the next one, because it will come eventually. With that, I'll turn it over to Matt.
Thanks, Dan. So yeah, on the post-event, and I'll segue off of what Dan was saying there, to make sure as a service partner, we're providing very clear documentation of what we've done and what we've been hired to do. So any work that's been done to the facility, any type of timesheets, if there's an AIA contract for any type of reconstruction, if there's OEM paperwork that we need to hand over, and if we do something like gamma irradiation on documents, we make sure that we have a certificate that we provide to the customers so that they can indeed see the proof of that service being done. So any type of service proof and those other items are important to make the final process go through well. We like to have a post-loss debrief with the customer, have that meeting and do a final walkthrough, kind of talk about anything on the project that we can learn lessons from for next time around. Karen and Dan had both spoken to that, and with these partnerships, we want to make sure that as a service partner, we're definitely learning from each event as well. And so next time we can really smoothly transition into whatever work we need to do. When we do a final walkthrough with our customers after the job is completed, we'll walk through whatever the facility, and a punch list may be created. So we have the punch list that's created, and we finish the items on that, and then that's really when the final sign off will take place, is we want that punch list taken care of. So I know that I think we're running a little bit long here, so I will stop talking, pass it to Stephen, and I think there might be some Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Dan, you okay if we go over a little bit, or past one, Dan?
Yeah, I'm perfectly fine. I adjusted my schedule.
Great, thank you so much. Why don't we go, let's talk about the key takeaways. We got several people in queue for questions, but why don't we talk about the key takeaways and keep it, key to the keys. Kara?
Yes, sure. So in pre-planning, relationships are key. Know who you need to know at the carrier, at the vendor, and build those relationships up front. It just makes the loss go better, and it's a heck of a lot more enjoyable. During the event, make sure that you have agreement to scope, and not just at the beginning and not just at the end, but all along. And leverage folks like Dan within your organization to help you get to that scope agreement. And then afterwards, don't let that event be for naught. Really take those lessons learned, circle back, take that extra time, and make sure that you incorporate all the groups in your organization that could benefit from those lessons that you learned. Dan?
As real estate professionals, know your real estate, know your vulnerabilities, and plan for it. Have great working relationship with the business. That will win the day. Have a great working relationship with your risk team. That will win the day. And have a great partnership with your external vendors, because they're going to bail you out at the end when everybody else is trying to fight for those resources to recover themselves. And then learn from it, make adjustments to the rest of your portfolio, and keep in mind those characteristics that I showed up front around steady hand, compassion, sound decisions, don't rush to the sound of the gun, and then break it down into bits and pieces and get after the work and get the business back in business. Matt.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, and I'm going to just kind of reiterate what both Kara and Dan had said with relationships are key. We want to make sure that we are indeed true partners and we're not vendors with our customers. We are partners, and that will help drive that resource planning. We understand what their portfolio looks like, and we're able to plan our resources around that. So when there is an event, we're able to help out appropriately and quickly. As far as the event, we're brought in to help triage and mitigate, make sure that we stabilize whatever that facility is, whatever the contents of that facility are, and that we're helping to make sure that it's a successful recovery. And then as far as post-event goes, that post-loss debrief is very important. Make sure that the customer is indeed satisfied. We've done everything that we said we were going to do, and that everybody's in agreement when we walk away from this. And if there are any lessons learned, we don't want to have to relearn them a second and third time. We put that into practice right away with our best practices. Stephen?
Excellent. All right, thanks. We've got some questions. First one is for Dan. Dan, can you talk about how important it is in the heat of the moment as the restoration and cleanup occurs that you, as the real estate person, control the vendor partners who are assisting with the recovery, and you need to agree on pricing right up front, or you can get charged way too much. And once getting that price, make sure the insurer is okay with it.
Yeah, so what I have in place right now is I have 4 partners, vendor partners out there that we have contracts in place to do various cleaning. And I'll give you an example in today's pandemic. I have 4 vendors today that I reached out prior to this and agreed on a contract, agreed on a per square foot pricing should we have to do any sort of deep clean, disinfectant cleaning, should we have any sort of situation in our facility. So you have that in writing up front before an event. If you're trying to negotiate pricing during an event, it's not going to work. You're going to pay way more for it, and then there's no partnership associated with that. So you have those contracts in place. You agreed on a pricing. You shared that pricing with our risk group. You share that pricing with the insurance group. So when an event happens, boom, you pull out one of those vendors that they're all equally qualified, but you pull one and you go ahead and execute it, and you know the pricing. You get out there, you triage the situation, and then from there, you know what you're going to spend on a triage because you know the scope, generally speaking, and you know what the cost per hour, per square foot, whatever that may be. And then from there, as you get into the recovery after you triage, then that's the time you work on a scope with your partner because you have a little bit of time to work through that, and then you agree on the scope and price on whatever else needs to get done once you triage and stabilize the situation. So you have to have those contracts up front with your partners. You know where you're going to spend during a triage, and then from there you go ahead and adjust the scopes as needed, and then you keep your insurance company, insurer involved as you develop that scope and you develop that pricing to get you beyond the triage phase. But if you're trying to negotiate triage pricing and triage resources, you're going to be very, very challenged, and it's my strong recommendation you have that in place like now for the next event.
And I can add that insurers look at 2 main areas as to where they try to control costs on the claim. And one is being the vendor pricing, right? So having that established up front kind of takes that out of the mix. The other piece is the productivity of that vendor and how they manage the project, right? So how many supervisors do they have over X number of staff? How many boxes should they move per hour? Things of that nature. So if you have a very large loss, it could be different for any type of industry, but make sure you have that metrics up front, because a lot of times they bring in a third party to kind of oversee the loss, and really what they're doing is just like auditing every move that the vendor's making. And you don't want to get into that situation, towards the end of the claim where the auditor is auditing off of one type of like their thought, like how it should work, and then your vendor thinks they're doing it exactly how you want it, and then you have a discrepancy, and they try to squeeze costs out of the claim there. So make sure that you all agree to what the metrics are, and what the ratio of supervisors to employees, and how many project management hours you should have, and things like that as well.
Great. We have a question, probably Kara and Matt could probably both answer, but it's an interesting question. Are service providers held in ready reserve compensated for not taking on other work that would prevent them from servicing IM if needed, Iron Mountain? Does the insurer cover these costs, which would mitigate the loss if damage actually occurred?
So I'm not aware that we actually we have contracts in place that have SLAs and expectations, and I think in that it talks about what our expectations are in terms of how fast they can ready themselves to support us. But I'm not aware that we're paying them a retention so that they would choose to work with us over somebody else in the event of a wide scale event. But I'll ask Matt if those arrangements are in place. And if they did, I think it would be something that I would talk to your insurer for, because they may have something like that in arrangement with like a BMS CAT or others. But I think that's a very interesting question. So Matt, what do you see in the industry?
Yeah, that's a good question, but there is not a retainer fee or anything like that in place. The way that we set it up is we do have resources at the ready, and if it's an event like a hurricane, for example, what we do is a certain section of the country is going to be affected, but we're able to bring in resources from other areas, and we have enough resources available as a national company with equipment and proper project leadership, where we're able to be ready for multiple jobs at one time. So we don't lose out, so to speak, by waiting for Iron Mountain or whoever to give us a call. We do have other jobs that happen simultaneously, and that negates the reason for having any type of retainer fee.
Yeah, Steve, so we do have, when it comes to fuel, for example, I do have a fuel contract in place. We do have a fuel contract in place to where we are paying a small amount on a year basis to get fuel to us when we need it. So that is a retainer fee we do pay, but we only will pay for the fuel if we trigger it during an event. But we do have a vendor on standby to be up there on priority. Should we need fuel, we'll get it. And it's a very small amount, but we do pay that. And I think that's a smart thing to do, because we learned from various hurricanes that came through from Sandy all the way forward. Fuel is a significant commodity to get in place. So we do have that contract in place. But all the other contracts we have with our vendors, our partners, I should say, there's no retainer other than the fuel to get fuel.
Well, is that locked in at a certain rate?
So we pay a flat fee to retain, and it's minimum money. It's not much, but we do get up on a priority, and then once the fuel is delivered, we pay market price for it.
Yeah. Which changes significantly once there's a natural disaster, I assume. So.
Yeah, but what that does for us is it locks us in terms of the price pre-event, so we're not paying astronomical amount for the fuel itself. Right. So for us, it is worth that investment, and it goes back to my earlier point: is what's important to you as a business, and what have you learned, and what investments you need to put in place for the next event. And this is one we felt was critical for us.
Thanks. Well, before we wrap, I'm dying to ask you this question, Dan. What keeps you up at night?
Well, about the only way I think I can answer that one is, what if I wake up to a crisis? So the
Yeah.
short answer is don't sleep, right?
Yeah, exactly.
No, I mean, so that does concern me a little bit is, when's the next crisis? What if I wake up to one? And then, did we as an organization with our partners across the business and our partners across the industry do enough to minimize our damage going forward? And then on the soft side of things, I believe we've established, I know we've established a solid culture within Iron Mountain and even in my past career to where we can react, we can sustain, and we have the right passion to get us back to where we need to be. So I think if you have the hard side of things in place, to be able to triage, and I think you have the soft things in place in terms of the relationships and culture you built within your organization. I should be able to sleep at night, but for some reason I drink too much coffee.
Yeah, especially now. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for participating. I thought it was really a fantastic conversation, and hopefully we don't have any natural disasters anytime soon. We're wrapping up a pandemic and probably entering into hurricane season, and tornado season's right on us too. So anyways, well, thanks for all the great input, great information, and have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.